Let's say, for instance, I know a couple of people who kill simply for the fear that they see in their victims' eyes and for the sight of blood in their bodies. My opinion is that they do it to feel superior or high on the victim's fear, and they're thirsty for the spill of blood.
Hi, everyone.
Hello.
I'm Lauren.
I am Ken.
And this is Paradise After Dark.
Dark.
Paradise After Dark is an independent podcast covering true crime,
Unsolved mysteries,
missing people,
and every now and then an urban legend.
If you'd like to support our show and get a bunch of extra content, go ahead and sign up for our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website at paradiseafterdark.com.
On the website, you'll find links to all of our episodes, even the archived episodes, our mailing list, merch store, links to our social media, and of course, our Patreon.
And if you visit our website, you'll also find there a little virtual tip jar. So if you want to help out the show and give us a little tip, we'll give you a shout out on the show.
So, Ken.
Yeah.
We're just fresh back from CrimeCon.
Yep, fresh back. This is going to be our first real episode since CrimeCon.
And it's a doozy. It's pretty disturbing.
This is a very disturbing case, and I got to ask you a question before we start. When you think of Indiana, what's the first major case that comes to mind in Indiana?
Delphi.
Exactly. So anytime I hear Indiana, like the first thing that comes to my mind, Delphi, and then I start thinking of, that tragic situation and all the stuff surrounding that. But this particular case happened in 1991. It's very horrific. And we're only talking about 180 miles south of Delphi in a little town called New Albany. So
this week we are discussing the case of Shanda Sharer. Shanda Sharer was born June 6, 1979 in Pineville, Kentucky, to Stephen Sharer and his wife, Jacqueline Sharer, who was later known as Jacqueline Vaught. After her parents divorced, her mother remarried and the family moved to Louisville, Kentucky. There, Shanda attended 5th and 6th grades at St. Paul's School, where she was on the cheerleading squad, volleyball team, and softball team. When her mother divorced again in June of 1991, the family moved to New Albany, Indiana, and Shanda enrolled at Hazelwood Middle School. Early in the year, she transferred to Our Lady Perpetual Help School, a Catholic school in New Albany, where she joined the girls' basketball team. Shanda was described as a bubbly 12-year-old. Despite all of the moving around, she was, by all accounts, a normal girl who made friends easily.
So in 1991 at Hazelwood Junior High School, this is where Shanda's going to meet 15-year-old Amanda Haveren. Now, their relationship started off rocky, where they got in some trouble at school, but Sharer and Haveren became fast friends, and not long after, they actually became romantic partners. In October of that year, the pair attended a school dance together. There, Sharer and Haveren were confronted both by 16-year-old Melinda Lovelace, who had previously been dating Haveren for more than a year and was now extremely jealous of Amanda's relationship with Shanda. Background on this relationship. In 1990, Melinda Lovelace met and began dating Amanda. Now, after her father left and her mother remarried, Lovelace was erratic, depressed. She was in counseling. She started fights in school. She was not having a good time. Got herself into a lot of trouble. And in March of 1991, Lovelace came out of the closet to her mother, who was initially furious, but eventually began to accept it. In the fall of 1990, Lovelace's relationship with Haveren deteriorated, and Lovelace came to associate this deterioration with Shanda. Now, Lovelace threatened Shanda in public and soon even talked about killing the 12-year-old. Now, according to Shanda's mother, Shanda's grades dropped as she began to get into trouble at school. Now, after discovering a series of sexually graphic letters Amanda had written to Shanda, Vaught pulled her out of public school. This was the point where Shanda's mother transferred her to Our Lady of Perpetual Help Catholic School. So she's trying to get away from this public school because she fears that this is part of the problem. Unfortunately, that did nothing to stop the horrific events that would soon unfold.
On the cold winter night of January 10th, 1992, Lovelace enlisted 3 friends, Lori Tackett, 17, Hope Rippey, 15, and Tony Lawrence, 15, to help her take her revenge on Shanda. Well, technically, Rippey and Lawrence, both friends with Tackett, had not ever previously even met Lovelace.
Which kind of makes this a little worse.
The foursome started out at Lovelace's house. They borrowed some clothes from Lovelace and she showed them a knife, telling them she was going to scare Shanda with it. While Tackett, Rippey, and Lawrence had never met Shanda prior to that night, Tackett had already known of the plan to intimidate the 12-year-old. Lovelace explained to the 2 other girls that she disliked Shanda for being a copycat and for stealing her girlfriend. Lovelace didn't reveal her true intentions to the other girls. Her intentions to follow through on her threats to murder Shanda.
Well, the girls drove to Jeffersonville where Shanda was spending the weekend with her father. When they arrived at Shanda's house, Rippey and Lawrence posed as friends of her girlfriend Amanda and claimed that Amanda wanted to see Shanda at the Witch's Castle in Utica. This is a rundown stone building overlooking the Ohio River. Now, Shanda told the girls to come back later because her father would be asleep and she could sneak out of the house then. Well, with Lovelace's plan temporarily paused, the 4 girls decided to drive to Louisville to see a band play.
After midnight, Tackett drove the group back to Shanda's. Lovelace hid under a blanket in the back of the car with the knife. She allegedly told her friends that before the night was over, she wanted to both have sex with and murder the 12-year-old. They arrived at midnight and Shanda snuck out of the house to meet the girls. When she asked where Amanda was, the girls claimed that she would be meeting them at the Witch's Castle. On the ride to the secluded Witch's Castle, the girls asked Shanda about her relationship with Amanda. Lovelace then sprung out from the back seat, put the knife to Shanda's throat, and began interrogating her about her sexual relationship with Amanda. They drove toward Utica and the Witch's Castle. Tackett told the girls that a local legend said that the house was once owned by 9 witches and that the townspeople burned down the house to get rid of the witches. When they arrived at the castle, Lovelace bound Shanda's wrists and ankles before all the girls took turns kicking her. Lovelace taunted that she had pretty hair and wondered how pretty she would look if they were to cut it off. They ripped off her Mickey Mouse watch and danced to the song the watch played. Now keep in mind, as I've mentioned 3 or 4 times already, Shanda is a 12-year-old. She's wearing a Mickey Mouse watch that plays music. However, did a child of 12 years old get mixed up in all of this, is what I want to know.
Well, once that was all done, Lovelace began taking Shanda's rings off and handing each to the girls. Well, Tackett further taunted Shanda, claiming that the witch's castle was filled with human remains and that Shanda's remains would be next. To further threaten Shanda, Tackett then retrieved a shirt with a smiley design from the car and lit it on fire, but immediately feared that the fire would be spotted by someone passing car, or whatever, so the girls loaded Shanda into the trunk of the car.
During the car ride, Shanda continued begging them to take her back home. Lovelace ordered Shanda to slip off her bra, which she then handed over to Rippey, who slid off her own bra and replaced it with Shanda's while steering the car. They became lost, so they stopped at a gas station and covered Shanda with a blanket. While Tackett went inside to ask for directions, Lawrence called a boy she knew in Louisville and chatted for several minutes to ease her worries, but did not mention Shanda's abduction. They returned to the car but became lost again and pulled up to another gas station. There, Lawrence and Rippey spotted a couple of boys and talked to them before once again getting back into the car and leaving, arriving sometime later at the edge of some woods near Tackett's home in Madison. Tackett led them to a dark, abandoned building off a logging road in a densely forested area. Lawrence and Rippey, who were becoming increasingly afraid of what was happening, stayed behind in Tackett's car.
Yeah, keep in mind, they have no idea who this girl is. They just know that all of this is happening, and they're kind of right in the middle of it at this point.
Yes.
This is not what they signed on for, I don't believe.
Right.
So for 7 hours, the girls brutally tortured Shanda. First, Lovelace and Tackett stripped off Shanda's clothes and proceeded to punch her repeatedly. And Lovelace then hit Shanda's face with her knee until she bled profusely from her mouth.
The torture wasn't enough to satiate the older girls. They then tried to slit Shanda's throat, but the knife was too dull. Rippey came out of the car to hold Shanda down. Lovelace and Tackett took turns stabbing Shanda in the chest. They then strangled her with a rope until she was unconscious, placing her in the trunk of the car, and told the other girls that Shanda was dead. They then went to Tackett's house to clean up and drink sodas before realizing that their victim, now screaming in the trunk, was still alive.
Picture that, if you will. All of this, and she's still strong enough to be alive.
Lawrence and Rippey stayed behind as Tackett and Lovelace went, quote, country cruising, driving to the nearby town of Cannon. Shanda continued making crying and gurgling noises, so Tackett stopped the car. When they opened the trunk, Shanda sat up, covered in blood with her eyes rolled back in her head, but unable to speak. Tackett beat her with a tire iron until she was silent, claiming that she felt the victim's head cave in, and then told Lovelace to smell it. Lovelace also beat and sodomized Shanda with a tire iron. This tire iron assault was off and on for hours as the girls went on a joyride through the countryside. When they returned to Tackett's house, she laughingly described what had just happened to Rippey.
So the girls are going to leave. They're going to drive to a gas station. They pumped some gas into the car, and then they bought a 2-liter of Pepsi. And Tackett poured the Pepsi out of the bottle and then refilled it with gasoline. They then proceeded to drive north of Madison, past Jefferson Proving Ground, to Lemon Road off US 421, a place known to Rippey. So this is a place that she's familiar with. Now, Lawrence remained in the car while Tackett and Rippey wrapped Shanda, who was still alive, mind you. Now, she's only able to whimper at this point. She's right at the last legs here. So they wrapped her in a blanket and carried her to a field by the gravel country road. Now, Tackett made Rippey pour the gasoline on Shanda and then set her on fire. Now, Lovelace at this point was not convinced that Sharer was dead, so they returned a few minutes later to pour the rest of the gasoline on her.
Okay, so
let's take a quick break from this horrific story for a minute.
And let this sink in. As the 4 girls ate breakfast at McDonald's just after the killing, they laughed as they compared their sausage breakfast to Shanda Sharer's burnt corpse. And the girls just couldn't keep from talking. A friend of Lovelace's, Crystal Wathen, came over to Lovelace's house and they told her what had happened. Then the 3 girls drove to pick up Amanda and take her back to Lovelace's house, where they told Amanda the story.
Remember Amanda? That was Shanda's girlfriend.
She was the reason that
all of this is going down. All of this
is happening. So both Amanda Haverin and Crystal Wathen were reluctant to believe the story until Tackett showed them the trunk of the car with Shanda's bloody handprints and socks still present. Amanda was horrified and asked to be taken home. When they pulled up in front of her house, Lovelace kissed Amanda, told her she loved her, and pleaded with her not to tell anyone. Amanda promised that she would not. Later that morning, 2 hunters found the body. They initially thought it was a mannequin of some sort. Side note, it's never a mannequin, people. But upon exiting the vehicle, realized that it was clearly a burned body of a child. They called the police at 10:55 a.m. and were asked to return to the body.
So they asked them to go back and wait there?
Yes.
Okay.
Jefferson County Sheriff Buck Shipley and detectives began an investigation, collecting forensic evidence at the scene. They initially suspected a drug deal gone wrong and did not believe the crime had been committed by locals. It is also to be noted that her body was posed in a suggestive position, very obviously meaning that this was done on purpose and with intention. It was also found that the victim's face and hands were burnt in an attempt to keep her unrecognizable and unidentifiable.
Well, meanwhile, Shanda's father, Stephen, noticed his daughter was nowhere to be found early on January 11th. I remember she had snuck out. She was staying with her father, so he didn't have any clue of this. Now, after phoning neighbors and friends all morning, he called his former wife, Jackie, at 1:45 p.m. They met and filed a missing person report with the Clark County Sheriffs. Now, at 8:20 p.m., a completely hysterical Lawrence and Rippey went to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office with their parents. So they've gone home. They've told their parents that this is what happened. So they both give the police these very rambling statements identifying the victim as Shanda, naming the other two girls involved as the best they could, and describing the main events of the previous night. Now, keep in mind, I don't think they knew at all who Shanda was until this night.
Right.
There might have been suggestions of him, but I don't think there was ever any introduction, as we mentioned earlier.
Right.
Now, after an inter-county investigation, Shipley contacted the Clark County Sheriff and was finally able to match the body of Shanda to the missing person report.
Indiana police called Dr. George R. Nichols, chief medical examiner from nearby Kentucky, to do the autopsy. Even he called the findings gruesome. Shanda's wrists and ankles had been bound, he said. Her legs had been slashed, and she had been beaten repeatedly in the head with a blunt object. She was also brutally sodomized with a foreign object. Finally, she was doused with gasoline and burned beyond recognition, Dr. Nichols said. He listed the official cause of death as burns and smoke inhalation. She had been burned alive.
Well, the chilling details of Shanda's death would leave the 12,000 residents of this picture postcard Ohio River town deeply shaken and kind of searching for answers. They're like, whoa, what is all this? Some in Madison have laid the blame on evils that seeped in from outside their town. But for others, Shanda's death had opened the shutters on a darker place in their own community, a place that stands in the stark contrast to the nostalgic image that, they sort of present to the tourist.
Sounds kind of like the town that we live in.
Exactly. Well, the parents recoiled at the thought of their children's past contacts with the accused girls. Could you imagine, if this girl's been to your house before, or your child's been hanging out with this other child?
Right, yeah.
Well, for a time, they demanded in this town that their children take precautions never before thought necessary in Madison. So, they want their kids calling when they got over to a friend's house, or, hey, instead of just, standing outside waiting for me to come, I want you to wait inside the theater lobby until I get there or your ride comes. So they're very nervous at this point.
The county prosecutor, Guy Mannering Townsend, clamped a lid on all official information about the crime. He and defense lawyers refused to comment publicly. Despite the scarcity of facts, or perhaps because of it, rumors and whispers about other dimensions to the crime soon began to drift across the town. Today, virtually anyone you ask in Madison has heard the talk, none of it officially confirmed, that the dead girl and one of her killers were involved in a lesbian lovers triangle, or Satanism, or both.
So they thought this is evil?
Well, remember, this was the early mid-90s. Remember the so-called satanic panic was happening?
Oh,
so, at that point, a lot of these crimes that people immediately began to cry the occult or Satanism or,
Exactly.
Let's take another quick break and finish this off. Okay, now that we're back, I want to take a look at these four older girls and talk a little bit about why they would scheme and participate in such a heinous crime against a 12-year-old. Because, your average 15, 16, 17-year-old girls don't do this kind of things.
No.
Melinda Lovelace was born in New Albany, Indiana on October 28, 1975, the youngest of three daughters to Marjorie and Larry Lovelace. Now, Marjorie Lovelace later described Larry as a pervert and sexual deviant who would wear her and her daughter's underwear and makeup, was incapable of staying monogamous, and had a mixture of jealousy and fascination with seeing her have sex with other men and women. Both parents had trouble keeping jobs, and extended family members often described the Lovelace daughters as visiting their home hungry, apparently not getting enough food at home. When Larry did work, he spent his money on himself, buying firearms, motorcycles, and cars. Through most of their relationship, Larry was unfaithful to his wife, and they often had an open marriage. They would often visit bars in Louisville, where Larry would pretend to be a doctor or a dentist and introduce Marjorie as his girlfriend. He would also share Marjorie with some of his friends from work, which she found disgusting. During an orgy with another couple at their house, Marjorie tried to commit suicide, an act she would repeat several times throughout her daughter's childhoods. When Melinda was 9 years old, Larry forced Marjorie to participate in a gangbang, after which she tried to drown herself. After that incident, she refused him sex for a month until he violently raped her in front of her daughters. In the summer of 1986, after she would not let him go home with two women he met at a bar, Larry beat Marjorie so severely that she was hospitalized. He was convicted of battery.
Only battery.
Only battery. There was also accusations that Larry molested Melinda, but this is something that Melinda would always deny. Melinda slept in the same bed as Larry until he left and abandoned the family when she was 14. But two of Melinda's older sisters accused Larry of molestation, and their cousin Teddy accused Larry of molesting her from ages 11 to 14. Teddy described an incident in which Larry tied all three sisters in a garage and raped them in succession. However, the sisters did not confirm this account. Larry was verbally abusive to his daughters and fired a handgun in the direction of Melinda's older sister Michelle when she was 7, intentionally missing her.
Sounds like a stand-up guy.
He would also embarrass his children by finding their underwear and smelling it in front of other family members. But before all of this, before Larry took off, for 2 years, beginning when Melinda was 5, the family was deeply involved in the Graceland Baptist Church. Larry and Marjorie gave full confessions and renounced drinking and swinging while they were members. Larry became a Baptist lay preacher, and Marjorie became a school nurse. The church later arranged for Melinda to be taken to a motel room with a 50-year-old man for a 5-hour exorcism.
Now, mind you, they're taking the child, not the man, not the father, not this other asshole, but somehow it's all Marjorie's fault or Melinda's fault, and we're going to take her to a hotel room for an exorcism.
Now, why would a 5-year-old, she was 5, why would she need an exorcism at 5 years old?
That's what I am blown away.
So get this. Larry became a marriage counselor with the church and acquired a reputation for being too forward with women, eventually attempting to rape one of them.
So they put him in charge of a marriage counseling, and then he basically directs all of his nastiness towards women.
After that incident, the loveless parents left the church and returned to their former professions, drinking and open marriage. In November of 1990, Larry was caught spying on Melinda and a friend, and Marjorie attacked him with a knife, sending him to the hospital after he attempted to grab it. She then attempted suicide again, and her daughters called authorities. After this incident, Larry filed for divorce and moved to Avon Park, Florida.
Ah, come on.
Melinda felt crushed, especially after Larry remarried. He sent letters to her for a while, playing on her emotions, but eventually severed all contact with her.
Mind you, this does not excuse what she's done to Shanda at this point. So this is just some sort of a brief sort of...
These are the facts of her past.
Exactly. But obviously we're not trying to make an excuse for her, but...
These would be what we call mitigating factors.
Exactly. So I'm just trying to... I like that terminology. I like that. It's good.
We go over this quite often,
we
aggravating
do.
and mitigating factors.
And I think that's why I just like the way you say the word, so I have to put that out there. I think I just do it that way. Well, Mary Lori Tackett was born in Madison, Indiana on October 5th, 1974. Her mother was a fundamentalist Pentecostal Christian, and her father was a factory worker with 2 felony convictions in the 1960s. Now, Tackett claimed that she was molested at least twice as a child at ages 5 and 12. In May of 1989, her mother discovered that Tackett was changing into jeans at school, and after confrontation that night, attempted to strangle her. So you got to understand that women who are Pentecostals must wear long dresses, and they don't cut their hair, they don't wear makeup, so changing into jeans would have been a huge problem, which is why her mother and her got into a huge confrontation. Well, social workers became involved at this point, and Tackett's parents agreed to unannounced visits to ensure that the child abuse was not occurring. Well, Tackett and her mother came into periodic conflict, At one point, her mother went to Hope Rippey's house after learning that Rippey's father had purchased a Ouija board for the girls and demanded that the board be burnt and that Rippey's house be exorcised. Tackett became increasingly rebellious after her 15th birthday and also became fascinated with the occult. Now, she would often attempt to impress her friends by pretending to be possessed by the spirit of Diana the vampire. She began to engage in self-harm, especially after early 1991 when she began dating a girl who was extremely involved in this practice. Now, her parents discovered that the self-mutilation and they decided, okay, we got to check her into hospital. So in 1991, in March, they checked her into hospital and she was prescribed an antidepressant, but then released. Now, 2 days later, she cut her wrist deeply and was returned back to the hospital. Now, after treatment of her wound, she was admitted to the hospital's psychiatric ward. Now, she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and confessed that she had experienced hallucinations since she was a young child. She did drop out of high school in September of 1981, but still hung around the area. So she's hanging around with the school and the screw groups and things like that. Now, once she met Melinda Lovelace in December of that year, the two were like besties. They were inseparable. Now, my personal opinion on this is that Tackett is probably, of the four girls, the most evil.
Well, the fact that she was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and I am not a doctor, psychiatrist, psychologist, but I do know a bit about it. I have researched this personality disorder, and it's one of the not so great ones that's hard to treat. And someone with BPD, usually they're very impulsive. They have inappropriate and intense anger that they can't control. They have a lot of issues. I could go on and on and on about, I don't have it all in front of me. I just know.
It's not the disorder where they forget who they are, they lose time or become different, right? This is, what's that called?
Oh, that's dissociative identity disorder.
Okay.
Used to be called multiple personalities. No, but borderline personality disorder is like characterized as a long-term pattern of being unstable, distorted sense of who they are or what's going on around them.
So it gives
hallucinations.
It would make them lack remorse.
Lack empathy, uncontrollable anger, urges, homicidal urges, suicidal urges.
Amongst all the documents, and again, remember, it was Melinda's idea for all of this. Lori was just involved, Tackett. But once she was involved, I think she wanted this. And if you go back and listen to the very beginning, the letter that I read in the very beginning was a letter that was written to a crime library reporter from Lori.
From Lori Tackett.
Exactly. So that's why I said a lot of the documents you read and the stories and the research really point to her being the most vile of all.
Well, and the thing about it's not, I don't think that it's that she's vile or evil. I think that she has this personality disorder that is extremely hard to treat. There's no cure for it.
It's not an excuse. It's
not an excuse, no. But there's no cure for it, and it's extremely hard to treat. So I think that is the reason why she was so aggressive and into it. It wasn't even her quote unquote girlfriend that Shanda was dating. It was her friend. It was Lori Lovelace who was in the relationship with Amanda.
Exactly.
Or, I'm sorry, Melinda Lovelace.
Melinda, yes.
Melinda Lovelace was in the relationship with Amanda, and Melinda wanted to get revenge, but Lori was like, we're going to kill this bitch.
Yeah, she's all about it. Now, again, it's not, her issues are not an excuse.
No.
It's sort of an explanation as to how she could come to this point.
A mitigating factor.
I see, there it goes again.
So we're going to move on now to Hope Ann Rippey. She was born in Madison, Indiana in June of 1976. Her father was an engineer at a power plant. Her parents divorced in February of 1984, and she moved to Quincy, Michigan with her mother and siblings for 3 years. She claimed that living with her family in Michigan was somewhat turbulent. Her parents resumed their relationship in Madison in 1987. She was reunited with her friends Lori Tackett and Tony Lawrence, whom she had known since childhood, although her parents saw Tackett as a bad influence.
Rightly so.
As with the other girls, Rippey began to self-harm at the age of 15. Now, Tony Lawrence was born in Madison, Indiana in February 1976. Her father was a boilermaker. She was close friends with Hope Rippey from childhood onward. She was abused by a relative at age 9 and was raped by a teenage boy at age 14, although the police were only able to issue an order to keep the boy away from her. He was not charged with anything. She went into counseling after the incident but didn't follow through with it. She became promiscuous, began to self-harm, and attempted suicide in the 8th grade.
Well, despite all their ages, due to the heinous acts that occurred that evening, all 4 girls were tried as adults, and they accepted plea bargains in order to avoid the death penalty. Now, Lawrence and Rippey, the younger of the two, less involved in the torture and more forthcoming with authorities, received lighter sentences, with Lawrence getting 20 years and Rippey getting 50, which was actually after appeal was shortened to 35. Meanwhile, Tackett and Lovelace, who played a larger part in it, both received a 60-year sentence.
Now, Jackie Vaught, Shanda's mother, made headlines 20 years after her daughter's murder when she developed a kind of relationship with her daughter's killer, Melinda Lovelace. In her time in prison, Lovelace had taken to training dogs for the disabled through the Indiana Canine Assistance Network program. In 2012, Vaught donated a puppy in her daughter's honor to the program, specifically so Lovelace could train the dog. Despite facing criticism for working with her daughter's murderer, Vaught was adamant in her decision. It's my choice to make. She's my child. If you don't let good things come from bad things, nothing gets better.
Exactly.
And I know what my child would want. My child would want this. So, Lawrence was released from prison, the earliest, on December 14, 2000, after serving 9 years. She remained on parole until December of 2002.
Yeah, we're going to find out some disturbing stuff because all 4 of these girls are walking free.
Now they are.
Exactly. So on April 28, 2006, Rippey was released from Indiana Women's Prison on parole after serving 14 years of her original sentence. She remained on supervised parole for 5 years until April of 2011. Now, she did appear on Dr. Phil and faced Shanda's mother, Jackie, but Jackie was not accepting of her apology and actually told her to her face on Dr. Phil's show that she should have sat there and completed her prison time if, in fact, she was really sorry.
So Tackett was released from Rockville Correctional Facility on January 11, 2018, the 26th anniversary of Shanda's death, after serving nearly 26 years, and has already completed an additional year of parole. So she's free.
So that brings us to Lovelace. Now, Melinda Lovelace was released from Indiana Women's Prison on September 5th of 2019 after serving a little over 26 years in prison. She will serve out the rest of her parole in Jefferson County in Kentucky.
So she's still on parole, but the other 3 are completely free now.
Exactly, which, I'm kind of conflicted here, Lauren. I firmly believe that Lovelace and Tackett should have been forced to serve their full term due to what seemed to be their enjoyment in the actions that horrific evening. Well, they seem to enjoy it. So on the other hand, can a child be fully rehabilitated or able to return safely to society? I mean, we've seen these child murderers and things grow to reoffend again later on in life in a worse manner.
Yes. And I don't think that they should have been released. And this is just my own personal opinion because we did just a few minutes ago get into mitigating factors. But I'd like to talk a little bit about the aggravating factors in this case. The scheming, the luring, and the abduction.
Well, the thing is,
torture.
You're right there, Lauren, because
those are all aggravating factors that they didn't just go kill this girl. They tortured her for 7 hours.
They had a chance. You're right. When you said that, I literally just came to my mind is they left Shanda's house and came back later to get her. They had a chance.
They had a chance to get out of it.
Get out of it.
And so, there's no excuse. There's no amount of, yes, they had horrible childhoods and yes, mental disorders and what but I think the aggravating factors outweigh the mitigating factors in this case, especially the fact that Shanda was 12.
12 years old.
12 years old.
Just a child. I mean, literally a child.
I mean, when I was 12, that's why I asked earlier, like, how does a 12-year-old get involved in this? And I don't get it, because when I was 12, I was playing with troll dolls and, you know, listening to the Bop Boys and Hanson.
Well, yeah, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. Well, once you got 12 years old. Now, and at one time with our daughter, we used to say, you know, she's a young 12-year-old. You know, you got a child that's almost got ready to be a teenager. So sometimes the teenagers, they seem a little older at 12 and some seem a little younger. So It seems to me that there was kind of a mix here where Shanda was kind of growing to be a little older on the 12-year-old side. She was ready to sort of traverse into teenage years because she was, according to Amanda and others, she was sexually involved with Amanda in the relationship, but yet she was still wearing the Mickey Mouse watch with the song. So she was kind of in that. She was about to be a teen, and I think she was still young and wasn't sure. You understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
So with that being said, that's why I said I feel like I'm conflicted, because I feel like Loveless and Tackett should have stayed their full term.
I agree.
But
I thought they should have been sentenced to life.
Exactly. I mean, to me personally, it's murder, but obviously they took plea deals, and I think that was to get the death penalty off. And I don't think the prosecutors probably knew that they were going to serve less than half of their sentence. So I guess, you know, like my question was, you know, we've seen that these child killers or these younger killers grow and reoffend.
Do you have like a example of somebody that you're thinking of that has reoffended? Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure there's a few out there. I know that for some reason I feel like I've heard it, but the one that sticks in my mind the most is Stephen Pratt, who was a 14-year-old. I think maybe he was 15-year-old. He was from New Jersey. He shot and killed his next door neighbor. So he serves 30 years in a maximum security prison, but then he gets released in 2014. And upon his release, he moves back to Atlantic City. He moves in with his mother. And 2 days after his release from prison, his mother was found dead with blunt force trauma to her head in his home. And when the police showed up, they arrested him, and he's like, "I'm guilty. I did it. I don't need a trial. Just take me back to jail."
Wow.
So yeah, it can happen. You know, so I guess my question, like I said, you know, my question really is, and I'm going to ask it again because I think it's important, is do you think that any of these 4 children are completely rehabilitated?
I really don't know, honestly. I guess only time will tell.
Exactly.
I mean, it's only been less than 2 years since Loveless was released, so I guess we should maybe make a Google alert for her name, see if she pops up again. I don't know.
Exactly. So maybe our listeners can tell us. Yeah,
we'd really like to hear what you think. And just so everyone knows, I've got the Facebook group back up and running. It's PAD True Crime Discussions. Please look it up on Facebook if you want to participate, if you want to talk about. We've got some really good conversation going right now on different subjects. So if you're on Facebook, please join the group. We can discuss this. We can discuss other cases. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Do you think that these girls could actually be rehabilitated back into society after what they've done?
Exactly. When you're a child and you grow up in prison, that makes it a little bit tougher when you're doing that. So
exactly.
I guess that's going to be it for tonight, Lauren.
Again, if you'd like to support our show, please subscribe to our Patreon at patreon.com/Palmahawk Media. That's PALMAHAWK Media.
And be sure to check out our website for links to all of our social media, Patreon, our merch store, and much, much more.
And please make sure to subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're listening on and rate and review us. This really helps us branch out and reach a wider audience.
And as always, thank you very much for listening
to Paradise After Dark.
Dark, 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 dark.